We are back, Waikiki Beach at the Queen Kapiolani Hotel. Dr. Mark Valk is here, filmmaker, and we have been speaking about his upcoming 4 films that he's planning to battle Vincent Bugliosi with, and the genesis of that. And we were just about to talk about the Dealey Plaza Echo and the Dealey Plaza UK having a conference, as they do in every April. Mark, let's get into that. Just give us a brief background that you know of the conference in UK, and who typically shows up. Who showed up this year?
Yeah. Every year, around the second or third weekend of April, we meet in Canterbury, the very famous Canterbury Cathedral, where that is, at the Christchurch University. So the history department has been very kind to give us a large room to have the conference. And every year is a mix of UK researchers and American researchers. And we bring over every year at least 1 or 2 Americans. This year we had Gerald McKnight, who wrote Breach of Trust, his fantastic expose of the Warren Commission. And we also had Larry Hancock, whose book someone would have talked, and he's connected to the Lancer Conference. So we bring them over, and they speak in connection with some of our local researchers. As an example, this year, which matched our magazine, we had a gentleman named Alaric Rossman, who's looked extensively at the Tippett murder and analyzed it, trying to kind of debunk the Dale Myers book on Tippett.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know about that, Len? Yeah.
Well, no, for anyone who doesn't know, talk about that.
Okay,
because first of all, I think people familiar with the assassination, the whole Tippett thing has got a whole mystery to it. You know?
It does, and it's. I'll give you an example. Let's just say, drawing from, as an example, John Armstrong's work on the 2 Oswalds and the role of Tippett in that. So if we look at some of the, as for an example, the witness testimony, and this will be how we kind of look to seek to construct the documentary, and we'll be doing that using 3D maps and animations in there, so that we can actually place, for example, you can see exactly where Tippett was, where the 2 Oswalds were in relationship to the testimony and documentation. Let's use a particular example.
Or the Oswald and the double.
And the double, yeah. Well, that's as John says, Harvey is the Russian-speaking Oswald who was killed in the Dallas jail. And then there was Lee, the taller, bull-necked Oswald, who was likely the one being maneuvered around by Jack Ruby to, say, go to the car dealer that goes driving the car really fast that you saw in the JFK film, shooting at another range. And also, this is where it connects to the potential of Tippett.
Right.
Because if we look very closely at the testimony, Roger Craig, a Dallas policeman who won Dallas Policeman of the Year in 1960, unfortunately a number of attempts were made on his life in the early 70s, and he eventually was killed in 1975. But he testified that he saw Oswald run down wearing a white T-shirt and jumped into a Ford Rambler, which was basically the car that Ruth Payne had. So that's a sighting of Oswald. Then, of course, we have the official account of Harvey Oswald walking up towards the bus stop and then doubling back, getting in the cab, and then going across. Well, what was interesting as well when you read the testimony, Len, is that the strange movements of Tippett in relation to this. And as we know from the CIA and FBI factions, including we spoke to Wes Swearingen the other day, Dallas police and other police forces have liaisons and connections. They work outside. They do a bit of moonlighting, maybe working as couriers and drivers and drop-offs for agencies. And this is potentially where Tippett could fit in if you're looking at his movements and the fact that he's driving all over Oak Cliff, which is not his beat, right? He's doesn't even live in the area. So this is completely outside his range. Well, it's testified to that just after the assassination, his car was parked right across the Trinity Bridge, which is the entrance into Oak Cliff, coming across from Dealey Plaza and the center of Dallas.
Okay.
Going towards Lee Harvey Oswald's rooming house at 1026 North Beckley. And he was spotted sitting in his car shortly after 12:30, as if he was waiting, and two of his friends who recognized him waved to him, and they testified to this to the Warren Commission. They saw, there's
so they saw him at
Tippett
one end
sitting
of the bridge, waiting maybe for someone
parked
to pass.
in the Gluco oil company gas station.
Right.
So shortly after that, we have Tippett all of a sudden, racing to the testified to by the top 10 records, dashes in and makes some phone call and then dashes out. And then the next thing we know, he's at 10th and Patton, just a couple of minutes away from the record shop. And by the way, a couple of minutes away from the Texas Cinema, because that record shop is about a block away from that cinema. 10th and Patton, going back towards Jack Ruby's house. And as a matter of fact, Glenn, where Tippett was killed was the exact midpoint almost between Oswald's rooming house and Jack Ruby's flat. So the placing of the second Oswald, the Lee Oswald, the one with the white T-shirt that jumped into the Rambler. Well, there was witnesses at a barber shop saw who looked like Oswald get out of a Rambler in a white T-shirt. That's in the Warren Commission.
Where's that?
That's in the Warren Commission, the testimony.
Right, but where
a barber
did he
shop
get out?
Near a barber shop in the vicinity of more of Jack Ruby's end of town, where Jack Ruby lived.
Right. So I can see already that I would need some kind of graphic and map to pinpoint this to really illuminate where these guys are and how close, because it sounds like they're all in the same vicinity.
Yeah, and it's quite, as you can see just from my speaking, it starts to get convoluted. And so you're absolutely right, Len. My aim in the films is to simplify that and actually give you the visuals that you can visualize as an example where the two Oswalds and how they're moving around based on testimony and witness documents to who they saw. So as an example, one glaring example is Warren Reynolds, who owned the auto shop the block away from the 10th and Patton where Tippett was killed. He
just
saw
a block away from 10th and Patton now.
He heard the shots, went out on his balcony on his auto car sales, looked, and running down the street was Oswald in a white T-shirt and a white jacket, reloading a revolver, of which Warren Reynolds followed. Now, the interesting thing, Len, is that Warren Reynolds was never called or interviewed by the police until January 21st, 1964, 2 months after.
Right.
And then 2 days after that, he was shot in the basement of his auto. Now, by pure serendipity, he survived. I believe it glanced off his skull or something.
Yeah.
He survived to give testimony later to the Warren Commission.
Right.
But nobody wanted his testimony because he was testifying that Oswald had a white T-shirt and a white jacket on, which they found the white jacket a couple of blocks away.
So he was running, and this guy took off his jacket, ditched it,
and then had a white T-shirt. But Oswald had a brown shirt on. Remember? Right. He was arrested. All the photographs show him in a brown shirt that was pulled, untucked, with a white T-shirt underneath. Okay. At no time was he identified by Warren Reynolds as having any kind of brown T-shirt. And in fact, that matches with Roger Craig's testimony with the white T-shirt. Additionally, there was witness testimony that Lee was in Jack Ruby's apartment as the neighbor went to knock on the door and testified, "Oh my goodness, that's Lee Harvey Oswald in Jack Ruby's apartment."
When?
Well, this was shortly before that, and I'll give you one more example. On November 20th, now here's just something that you can just consider, and it's easy to grasp. Dobbs House Restaurant is at 1221 North Beckley. Lee Harvey Oswald, his rooming house, is at 1026 North Beckley. So the rooming house, according to John Armstrong, belongs to Harvey Oswald. That's the Russian guy who eventually gets killed in the basement, who was arrested in a Texas cinema and taken out, and worked at that time at the school book depository. And we're talking now on Wednesday, November 20th, as an example. So on Wednesday, November 20th, all the records show, and Roy Truly, the manager of the school book depository, testified that Oswald was at work all day. His punch card was in and out. He never went back home over to Oak Cliff, double backed. Now, the interesting thing is that at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, November 20th, the waitress, Mary Dowling, gave evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald was in the restaurant and made a big commotion about the food and coffee. He was like complaining and swearing, like he was drawing attention, very similar to those cars.
Guy looks just like Lee Oswald.
Yeah, very similar.
Right.
But now the key on this one is that, you know who else was in there, Len, at that time?
No.
Officer Tippett. Officer Tippett frequented the Dobbs House restaurant daily. The waitress testified, Mary Dowling. Between 10 and 10:30, came in for his coffee as a regular customer. Now remember, Tippett, this is not, Oak Cliff is not his patrol area, and his home is not anywhere near Oak Cliff, yet he was a frequent customer. So here's this Oswald, or Lee Oswald, the larger one,
Right.
with the white T-shirt, perhaps later, comes in and makes a scene where Tippett IDs him, but does nothing to quell the disturbance. It's a forced scene. So, and then this gentleman was the guy, Lee, who was likely the gentleman at 10th and Patton who may have killed Tippett,
Right.
the second Oswald. Now, I know it's a bit convoluted, but this is just kind of a little bit of an example. Of course, we'll go into more detail and show how it relates to all the testimony and documents placing the different Oswalds at different times. This is just one simple example.
Right.
So you've got someone who testified, my goodness, it's Lee Harvey Oswald. He came into the coffee shop. But how could that be? Because he was at work at the Texas School Book Depository, as testified to by his time card and Roy Truly.
Right.
So this is an example of this strange dynamic, and it's quite prominent when you look at his families, the two Oswald families, his military service, and the ordering of the rifle.
Right.
So that's a little hopefully
And that's
tweak
what's
your
really
interest.
intrigued you, and you thought, as a filmmaker, no
Yes.
one's done this. I can put this in.
And this is something that people can understand. I think once they presented the evidence, this can be something they can see is quite well documented.
So let's take it the next step further then. What does that mean then? When someone has a double, someone who's impersonating him, creating scenarios and scenes so that this guy is seen to be upset, causing a scene here and there, drawing attention to himself.
Yeah, I mean, that's from the individuals I've spoken to, that's pure intelligence operations.
Right.
And all roads lead back to the CIA. I mean, Oswald,
Right.
If that's the case, and all these elements, when the evidence presented, if the viewer finds it compelling,
Right.
then those roads have to lead back to intelligence and the CIA, who
And then
put
it doesn't
these
sound
things
like
together.
anything that organized crime would have done if they wanted to bump off somebody. It doesn't sound like they've, not that I'm aware of, any kind of operation like that at all.
No.
However, as you mentioned, it sounds like everything you've read about in various books, and of course we know about the New Orleans scene where Lee is handing out pamphlets, and then even the arresting officer said it was really strange. It looked like the guys were there when the news cameras were there, and all of a sudden it was over.
Yeah, it was a staged event, clearly.
Staged event, yeah. So how many times does somebody have a staged event around?
Well, yeah, exactly. And if really the Oswald has moved around like a chess piece from New Orleans to Dallas, Fort Worth, and New York City. Right. And then his military records, you'll find very dynamic. So if you pre-read the John Armstrong book, Harvey and Lee, you'll see that Lee, in terms of the military, and Harvey, the two, were in two different military cities in California, one in Santa Ana, one in El Toro, and they both ended up in Natsugi, very parallel times, but different Marines had testified to these Oswalds, and they couldn't be in both. And the ones that have been pushed out, as an example, a prime example is Palmer McBride, and he's still alive, and we hope to speak to him.
Okay.
And he's going to testify that one of the Oswalds was at El Toro, where he was based in California. But how could he be when he's registered at Santa Ana, and there's other Marines saying he was there? So you've got these two military bases within a very short distance of each other, maybe less than, I believe it's 19 or 20 miles.
So someone's at both.
Yes.
Someone's
And
using his name, or there's someone who they're
there's two individuals using the same name.
Yeah.
They have similar characteristics, but the defining moment is, just consider that Harvey is the Russian-speaking short one, 5'9", shorter, slighter build. Lee Oswald, the real Oswald, is taller, bull-necked, 5'10", 5'11", doesn't speak Russian. This, all his Marine buddies in El Toro said, no, we never heard anything of Russian. The other guys in Santa Ana, yes, he used to, we called him Oswaldovich.
Yeah.
But the other Marines never did. So how do you get these two competing stories from Marines?
Right.
Right? And of course, the Marines that are in the Warren Commission are the ones from Santa Ana. You have to really think, could any 24-year-old, I mean, I could study Russian now for the next 10 years and I could never speak it as conversational.
Right, yeah.
And even if he did study it, when would he have time to study it? between all his duties? Did he take a correspondence course? Like, we could do French, je m'appelle, So there's some very interesting things that Armstrong's put together.
Yeah.
And this is hopefully by the audience seeing these type of material that we start to say, you know what? There's something rotten in Denmark, in a sense, Does that make sense a bit?
Oh, I know. And if it doesn't, it makes you want to watch whatever film you're going to put together to put it and give it proper perspective.
Yeah, and keep it simple.
You were telling me that even, and I heard this from Tyrell as well, that Jesse Ventura was interested in having John Armstrong in his show, but John didn't feel there would be enough time to even come anywhere close to elaborating and explaining the complexity of this.
And the
intelligence operations might be grooming 2 or 3 people to look the same, sound the same, have characteristics that they can slip someone in,
Yeah. And this is not some kind of, obscure, thing, oh my goodness, it's out of like the Twilight Zone. This is post-World War II. CIA was, in the inception of the CIA was 1947.
Other intelligence communities.
Intelligence communities, the OSS morphed into it. And they had, they use doubles all the time. It's not, for intelligence work, it's not like some big secret. What was interesting is that likely the younger Russian-speaking Oswald came from Eastern Europe and was brought into the program because they have fluency, and the shorter Mrs. Oswald came from Eastern European background, again with fluent Russian speaking. And they cultivated these individuals, likely promised them, the American dream, and we will make sure you have a nice home and a good place to live. Brought over, being a patriotic individual to the country, all participating. It was all made to be very positive. And then they moved them around the chessboard. And the Russians did the same thing. Other intelligence agencies do it. So this one just turns out to be quite a prominent one because of the events on November 22nd. This is why they become quite amplified.
Yeah. And I can see even from a cover story point of view, if you wanted to have a wild goose chase on a trail and a convoluted thing, if you had someone set up as a patsy, and then the whole other time you have someone leading the shadow life around him, as soon as you start interviewing, the guy spoke Russian? No, he didn't. I knew him here, I knew him there. Which one are you going to believe?
Yeah, and then that's right, yes. But then they get contracted, so...
Well, we could leave that alone because I guess I would urge people to read John Armstrong's work, right? And then...
and this is what we're interested in putting in the film, exploring these kinds of ideas.
So that if you read John Armstrong's book and subscribe to that point of view or not, because that's one thing that Jim DiEugenio said. I think he said, I urge everyone to read the book, even if you don't subscribe, agree with all the conclusions. There is stuff in there that, some of these things you end up, like you said, scratch your head. Well, who are you? Alex Heidel or Lee Oswald?
Yeah.
Or Harvey?
And that's a perfect example, right? Or O.H. Lee. I mean, you've got all these people using these different monikers.
Right.
I mean, even on that level, that's a red flag. I mean, you and I don't have different. Right. I don't think. Unless.
And here's the thing, right? As I look into the case and just discuss it, I do with an interest that, what are the intelligence agencies doing? But the question is, it's kind of rhetorical. It's not a lone assassin. It's not a lone nut. It's what are the intelligence agencies doing? And the classic example that I would go back to was Richard K. Nagel?
Yes, Richard K. Nagel. Yeah, didn't he have some ID on him that was Oswald's ID or something?
There's Gordon Novell. Yeah. There's these other guys that seem to know of plots in advance. And that was the thing that Wes Swearingen had said, that he had ran across people who knew something's in the works. CIA, intelligence agencies are going to remove Kennedy. They're going to blame someone else. They're going to have some setup going. In the other tape recordings of Joseph Miltier, it'll be from a high velocity weapon from a building. Yeah. They'll blame somebody else right away. I mean,
I think you can see that In terms of intelligence agencies, if an internal coup d'etat took place, well, it's not some anomaly, because you can backtrack almost year by year right back to the early 1950s, governments being toppled in coups. So this is like a logical progression. The only traumatic thing for us is that it was an internal one. So that's
and the denial of it. See, that's what I think for me when I listened to Fletcher Prouty's views, and General Krulak, that General Ed Lansdale had some involvement in it, that again says to me, well, this is intelligence agency work, and how can Vincent Bugliosi deny all this? I mean, just push it under the carpet to the detriment of society. I mean, say, listen, we're not blaming Bob McNamara as the head guy that did this, but we've got to analyze what really went on to keep it from happening again, and to go forward, And if the Justice Department, CIA, and FBI, and every agency fails, then the whole country is a failure. It's a fraud. And people say, well, okay, grow up, accept that. Well, how about some of us are just trying to make it a little bit better? Yeah. Like Jim Garrison has said, this is not the country I was born in. I was born in to respect the flag and respect the institutions. And a police officer, stops you, you say, yes, sir, I'm not out here to break the law. What can I do to help, Yeah. And John Kennedy, ask not what you can do for your country, what you can do for your country, right? So that's the kind of attitude that I think people are having, that, we want to lay the groundwork 50 years ago, at least straight. See, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And we can speculate on big money, big powerful people had decided to remove JFK. And this is what they did. They initiated the intelligence community with their assets to pull out a covert operation. That does not mean everyone in the CIA, not everyone in the FBI. But, when you have a couple of people like J. Edgar Hoover, a couple of people who hated the Kennedys, Allen Dulles, when they say that guy's got to go, let's get some guys to do it. And then you recognize a plot in Miami, in Chicago. It's a pathetic poverty of HBO to come out with a 10-part series. Again, to say this is how Lee Oswald did it. Yeah, he was so smart. He's the only guy to take public transport to get away from the assassination, and then not to take credit for it.
And then offer his cab to a lovely old lady.
Pardon?
Offer his cab to a lovely old lady.
Yeah, right. Oh, after you, ma'am. Yeah. Right. That was the joke of all the people who are writing books on Oswald and this and that. I made a joke to a friend saying that I was going to write a book about that whole episode, and I was going to call it Fair Play for Fair Play.
Yeah.
Oh, really? And I said, no, come on, it's a cab fare,
Yeah.
It's a joke, right? Can you imagine, like, the cab driver?
Yeah.
Right, my interlude with Lee Oswald, right? He opened the door and said no,
Fair play for his fair play.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think just to follow up on you were asking me in terms of, because I come from a filmmaking background, how that might relate to what I'm doing here. Just to give you some background on that, part of my PhD, I was looking at a philosopher, Michel Foucault, who wrote about the notion of the public scaffold. And the public scaffold was a place where executions were held in a public space to instill fear. And part of my practice argument for my PhD was I was arguing that the JFK assassination was a return to the public scaffold, where the public was able to witness a political assassination as a means of instilling fear into the populace.
Yeah.
And this was witnessed through, say, the Zapruder film and the events as they unfolded on television, which had never happened before. This was the first television, first live assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald as well. So this theory underpinning practice, which I drew on my PhD, is part of the process now that I'm trying to infuse into these documentaries.
And that's an argument an angle I'd like, if I ever met, Gerald Ford or Blakey, say, imagine the poverty of your country when you say, organized crime did it. Well, they just killed the president and they got away with it scot-free.
And they made it a public spectacle.
Right. And they just said, we just took down your number one guy. What are you going to do about it? Yeah. Hey, Hoover. Hey, Justice Department. Hey, Pentagon. Thumb your noses at everybody because, a couple of gangsters did it.
Yeah.
And, people who subscribe to that, they have no answer for that. Well, yeah, we're scared. but the whole country's running scared of organized crime. I mean, come on. Those are guys that are there to take the blame if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. And just to let you know, when I was doing that, I actually found I went on eBay and I got the Zapruder's same Bell & Howell Director 414 series camera.
Right.
And I went to Dealey Plaza and bought some old 8mm film, which Kodak now has re-released. And I stood on the pedestal.
So they're re-releasing the film?
Yes, the actual stock.
Super 8?
Well, and regular 8. So the regular 8 film goes into the Zapruder camera. You have to hand thread it. And I went on the pedestal and filmed there around the same time on the anniversary, 12:30 p.m., November 22nd.
Yeah, I remember those because you used to kind of have to have like a little black bag when you had the film in there. I think you had to, halfway through, you had to flip it. You had to take it out in the total dark, change it, and thread it by hand.
That's correct, yeah. And that's what Abraham Zapruder did. It actually is a piece of 16mm film.
Right.
So you run it through, and then you take it out. It's on a spool, so it's safe from the daylight. And then you flip it over, thread it through.
Right.
And then when it's processed, they actually cut it down the middle and put one end underneath. So that was another interesting experiment I tried too, just to look at shadows and so forth. And I'll be doing a bit more work on that later. So that's how our practice and what we're interested in our work life can still be very helpful for contributing to the JFK case. So for all those researchers out there who would like to contribute, maybe draw from what you do in your day-to-day jobs. Maybe there's a way that can be woven into some new way to consider the evidence or research or something of that nature.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more from the Dealey Plaza Echo and the Dealey Plaza UK group. And I have great interest to hear more about the April conference.
Yeah.
We're here in April, and I find Hawaii just fantastic.
Yeah.
So what a shame. What's your impression of Hawaii here?
It's beautiful. I mean, it was would be a fantastic place for a conference, perhaps in the future. But this was like an excellent place. Yeah. Beautiful sunshine. You can bring the family. There's lots to do during the day, and even just hanging out here. Yeah. We've had a lot of discussions. So comfortable.
The hotel's great. Poolside's great. So
perhaps sometime in the future, we can reconvene
get things going. Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of our hour, so we'll wrap this up really quick. But for those who couldn't make it to Hawaii,
and Len, we're going to give the website. You're going to post their website for Dealey Plaza UK.
Oh, yeah, of course. Okay, all the show notes and things like that, right?
Okay, great.
Okay, Dr. Mark de Valk, pleasure. Thanks for being a guest.
Thank you, Len.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure. Thank you.